100 years ago, in what we like to think of as the good old days, people complain that life is just too fast. Work is too hard and relentless. There aren't enough hours in the day to get everything done. All this stress of life is even taking its toll on people's health. They complain of a whole series of nervous disorders: insomnia, headaches, anxiety, exhaustion, and something called spinal congestion. Doctors call this new disease neurasthenia, and they blame it on modern life. Makers of patent medicines are quick to offer a cure. There's Carter's Little Nerve Pills and a brand new tonic called Coca-Cola. Not only good as a soft drink, but also as the ideal brain tonic for headache and nervousness. A mild electric current passed through the body is also deemed therapeutic. But strangely, not everyone has neurasthenia, even if they're exposed to the same level of stress. One explanation: some people are born with a strong temperament that naturally resists the disease. Others are born with a weak temperament, making them susceptible. But maybe it's not that at all. Perhaps it's as simple as modern life is just too difficult, leading people to wonder, are we ready for life in the 20th century? In the middle of the 19th century, two brothers, Orson and Lorenzo Fowler, made and sold busts like this one. Supposedly, by reading this map of the head and face, you could evaluate someone's character and personality, and even predict his behavior. Here is where you would look to see if he had selfish sentiments. Over here is domestic propensities. This one, of course, is for intuitive reasoning and reflective faculties. Moral and religious sentiments, self-esteem, power of will. The system is called phrenology, and it is one of the more popular theories about human behavior at the time. Too bad it wasn't based on scientific evidence. Actually, it's only towards the end of the 19th century that scientists turned their gaze on human behavior. Traditionally, the province of philosophers, poets, and charlatans. These scientists try to make the seemingly irrational rational. They try to sort out what in human behavior is fixed at birth and what is learned through experience. It is a journey that twists and turns throughout the century as they and we go in search of ourselves. At the turn of the century, doctors interested in the mysteries of the human mind are drawn to this venerable hospital in Paris, Salpêtrière. Built as an arsenal in the 16th century, Salpêtrière is anything but an ordinary hospital. By the late 19th century, it has been transformed into the leading center for the study of a strange and perplexing malady, hysteria. A malady which becomes the passion of its iron-willed director, Jean-Martin Charcot.
Charcot, by all accounts of contemporaries, was a cold, difficult, authoritarian figure. And this is what caused him to be called the Napoleon of the neuroses.
In the Salpêtrière, there was a huge population of patients who suffered from what was arguably one of the murkiest disorders still around. That was hysteria. And it was a new opportunity. It was an opportunity for Charcot to bring all the skills he had as a neurologist to finally unpack the secrets of one of the most frustrating disorders for clinicians of the time.
Charcot observes patients with a dizzying array of unexplained symptoms. Spasms, paralysis, blindness, amnesia. Every physical and behavioral abnormality imaginable, all without a traceable cause. At the height of his career, Charcot turns his full attention to hysteria, certain he can find its cause. He is not the first to try.
The Greeks believed that hysteria was caused by the uterus, and that it was caused by the uterus as an unattached organ, kind of like a beach ball inside the body, and shifting around, so that Monday it might be in your neck, and Tuesday it might be in your wrist, and Wednesday it might be in your stomach, and wherever this uterus happened to end up, it created symptoms, the wandering womb, as they used to call it.
Centuries later, when Charcot received his medical training, hysteria is still tied to female sexuality. The belief that a woman's constitution makes her especially vulnerable is widely held. After all, remarks one of Charcot's colleagues, how could men have hysteria? They have no uterus.
Many doctors at the time, in fact, believed that hysteria wasn't a real disease at all. Hysteria they dismissed as artificial or simulating behavior, or perhaps when it appeared in female patients as a form of sexual promiscuity that was therefore contemptible on moral grounds. Charcot, however, argued throughout the course of his career that hysteria, in fact, was a subject of legitimate scientific study.
Hysteria cannot be a woman's disease because men suffer too. Charcot believes instead that a brain disease causes hysteria, and that only certain people succumb to it, those from tainted stock. It is passed down from generation to generation. Yet Charcot is not bothered when he cannot find hysteria in the extended families of his patients.
Charcot could argue that hysteria could transmute into other totally different pathological forms, such as epilepsy or Parkinson's disease or multiple sclerosis. With the hindsight of 100 years, of course, this seems absolutely ridiculous. These are totally separate pathological categories with different causes and different courses and different therapeutics. 100 years ago, however, they were very indiscriminately lumped together.
Charcot was going to take this vast amorphous wastebasket category of symptoms that was called hysteria, that had been the frustration of every clinician in every major hospital for centuries, effectively, and he was going to replace it with an elegant, neurophysiologically based model of its etiology and course. He was basically going to make hysteria lie down and reveal its laws.
Now, convinced of hysteria's cause, Charcot turns to categorizing its symptoms. He sketches every movement of his patients in vivid detail. When the new art of scientific photography appears, Charcot finds an even better method to capture the nuances of behavior. He hires a photographer to work full-time at Salpêtrière.
Charcot was a visuel. He loved to see things with his eye and see them in such a way that he could then study them exactly. And photography enabled you to stop time. That is, it enabled you to take a symptom, stop it, isolate it, and then to look at it in detail.
Charcot declares the camera does not lie. It would become as crucial to his study of hysteria as the microscope is for biologists.
Augustine was one of Charcot's favorite patients. She was his supermodel. Augustine was young, she was pretty, she was very well developed. He points all of this out in his books, and she responded well to the camera.
Charcot will take some 10,000 photographs of his patients. Searching for a pattern in the panoply of symptoms. Curiously, these symptoms seem to reflect the culture of the time.
He was producing photographs of beautiful, sometimes, women in very odd, but also in some ways very familiar positions. If you study the photographs of the hysterics in the Salpêtrière, you will see they resemble very much the women in paintings of the Renaissance. This is not an accident. Charcot was a great admirer of painting. He saw himself as a man who was cultivated, artistic, learned, and he wanted his own work to intersect with French culture generally, and it did.
Intellectuals and the public alike take great interest in Charcot's scientific endeavor. He becomes a celebrity himself on the streets of Paris and beyond. Renowned for his theatrical flair, he attracts a wide audience every Tuesday when he offers a lecture demonstration for doctors who come from around the world to see the proclaimed prince of science.
Patients would be brought in, sometimes patients he had never seen before, and he would diagnose them. And sometimes patients came in he had treated before, and they would be hypnotized, and Charcot would instruct them to have hysterical seizures. And he would explain what was going on to the audience. So it became the hottest ticket in Paris. Everybody went. Everybody who was in the medical world had to go. But novelists went, journalists went, painters went. Everyone who was anyone in late 19th century Paris had to go.
One member of the audience captivated by Charcot is a young doctor from Vienna who was just embarking on his own clinical career. Sigmund Freud. Freud has been trained in neurology at the best European laboratories, studying the brains of eels, fish, and eventually humans. But in time, Freud turns away from his microscope.
He did all the traditional things that people who were going to go into biological science would do at that time, and he was trying to apply the thinking that he was doing to issues of behavioral abnormalities, disturbances that he saw in people that he was working with. And he was very frustrated that although he could study the brain and try to look at its anatomy, he just didn't see any way that that work could be directly applicable to the clinical problems that he was concerned with.
While studying with Charcot in Paris, Freud becomes fascinated by the patients at Salpêtrière. But the brain lesion theory of his French mentor does not make sense. Patients with paralyzed hands can still move their arms. Those with paralyzed feet can still move their legs. Movements that would be completely impossible if their paralysis were truly caused by a brain disorder.
The symptoms of hysteria didn't follow biological logic. It followed a kind of folk logic. It followed a kind of a layman's sense of how paralysis probably should happen.
Freud's doubts increase when autopsy after autopsy of hysterical patients yield nothing. The hoped-for brain lesion never materializes. But perhaps what is most troubling to Freud is something much closer to home. Many Europeans, from the man on the street to the medical elite, share Charcot's belief that certain types of people are more prone to degenerate into madness. People who come from weakened stock, bad blood. Jews, as a group, are singled out. And the Jewish community in Vienna, of which Freud is a member, is no exception.
According to degenerationist theory, Jews were more prone to nervous and neurotic breakdown. They were included in a category of character types that were particularly susceptible to nervous degeneration. Understandably, Freud is not sympathetic to this idea. He senses an anti-Semitic content in it. And I'm almost certain that this is a personal factor that allows him to discard the inherited scientific wisdom of his time.
With this, Freud concludes his colleagues have failed to explain mental disorders. They have focused only on the physical body, ignoring the complexity of the mind. Finding hysteria's true cause, he believes, requires a radically new approach, which Freud will undertake in his private practice in Vienna. In the process, he will seek not only to explain hysteria, but also present this century's first distinctly psychological theory of human behavior. His first clue comes from fellow neurologist Joseph Breuer and Breuer's patient Bertha Pappenheim, referred to as Anna O.
Pappenheim, as a very young woman, had searched out Joseph Breuer and presented to Breuer an extraordinary idiosyncratic series of symptoms. She was having difficulty sleeping. She was suffering from nightmares. It was impossible for her to drink water. And in the more severe stages of her disorder, she had lost the ability to speak her native German. Breuer deals with her case over a period of months and years, and later tells the story of Anna O to a young Sigmund Freud.
Through hypnosis, Breuer coaxed Anna O to remember when her symptoms first appeared, to a time when her father became gravely ill. Once she remembered this traumatic episode and talked openly about it, her symptoms vanished. This becomes known as the talking cure. Freud never actually meets Anna O, but what impresses him most is the particularity of her symptoms and their link to a personal trauma.
To Freud, the symptoms of hysteria reveal not what's wrong with the patient's brain, but in a sense, what had gone wrong in the patient's life. They become symptoms of traumatic events, emotionally intolerable events that a patient had repressed, and therefore that rather than finding expression in appropriate emotional expression, found expression in bodily symptoms.
After seeing patient after patient, Freud believes that symptoms are invariably born out of psychological trauma. They are not meaningful in and of themselves, but act as a roadmap to a submerged inner life that is troubled.
Freud says that hysterics suffer mainly from reminiscences. That is, what causes a symptom is something in the past of a patient that he or she cannot get over, cannot face, cannot think about, and that it takes an enormous amount of energy to stay away from that part of their past.
So toxic is this memory, it is banished to a part of the mind which Freud calls the unconscious. The unconscious, the hidden place where dreams and slips of the tongue take shape. The home of fantasies and fears, of uncensored thoughts and sexual desires. the birthplace, Freud believes, of all emotional trauma. From his idea of the unconscious, Freud develops psychoanalysis, a new theory of the mind and a technique to gain access to it. A theory that many will not accept.
Freud is attacked in his own time on a great many different grounds. Certainly the most immediate and the best known of the grounds was that his ideas were pornographic. Because he discusses sexuality so extensively and in such a cold, neutral, analytic tone, they see this as morally impermissible.
Freud is also attacked for other reasons. The unconscious cannot be seen or tested. You cannot study it under a microscope or dissect for it. There is no material proof of its existence. To some, Freud's psychoanalysis seems too theoretical, too philosophical, too unscientific.
He was not a successful theoretician in the early years. His work did, however, attract the interest of a faithful band of adherents, and Freud used their commitment to him and to psychoanalysis as the basis for developing a psychoanalytic movement that resembles, unfortunately, in my view, in many ways, a church in its early years. People who have to be committed to the cardinal concepts of psychoanalysis in order to be treated as faithful adherents.
Freud was able to create a kind of religious zeal in intellectuals, many of whom were Jewish or felt, in the context of Viennese society, somewhat marginalized. Here they could be at the center of something very exciting that was potentially going to transform the way in which we think the mind works.
By 1914, Freud's following is still relatively small. But that will all change soon. Political events will thrust Freud's psychological theories onto a world stage, providing a brutal living laboratory for the efficacy of Freud's ideas. World War I. Germany is pitted against most of Europe, Russia, and later the United States.
First World War was Europe's encounter with mass destruction through technology. You didn't kill someone close up. You were often just lying in a ditch, and suddenly someone next to you would die because an explosion would send shrapnel and kill that person. Or you would be in a ditch for days, and then suddenly you were told, get up and walk across that field.
The war lasts longer than anyone had anticipated. Days become months, and months stretch into years. The human toll is enormous. Soldiers write home, the sights were awful. Dead men all over the place, some half buried by shells. It was simply a case of looking death in the face and waiting to be hit. Early in the war, an English psychologist named Charles Myers, based at the front, reports seeing soldiers come out of their trenches with mysterious symptoms. He thinks the cause may be a poison gas or chemicals, all of which are tested for to no avail. Doctors see soldiers with unexplained tremors, some who have gone blind or deaf overnight, others mute, paralyzed, crying. Myers speculates that these behaviors are somehow related to exploding shells on the front. So he calls it shell shock. But then soldiers who have yet to see combat appear with similar symptoms.
Shell shock, in many ways, resembled the symptoms of hysteria. That was very embarrassing. Hysteria was something that happened to women. Even though the 19th century saw theories that showed that men could be hysterics too, the crumbling of the psyche was thought to be something that women were prone to. This was sexist or even misogynistic science. Doctors tried to find another name for it so as to spare their soldiers the shame of being called hysterics.
They absolutely couldn't believe that men could be hysterical. And when they began to see the symptoms in men, all the doctors said, this looks like hysteria. But at some level, they would not allow themselves to believe it.
War neurosis, buried alive neurosis, soldier's heart, all names to describe male hysteria. Some 80,000 soldiers would succumb during the course of the war. Military doctors look long and hard for a physical explanation for the symptoms, for some evidence of damage to the nervous system, for evidence of tainted heredity.
They were so persuaded that there had to be an organic cause, and in some ways so prejudiced against a psychological cause, that as they eliminated and eliminated and eliminated possible sources, they just continued to look.
When doctors can't find anything, the only explanation left is cowardice. To many officers, these soldiers are malingerers who should be tried, court-martialed, and executed. And in fact, some are. But among doctors, there are a pioneering few, familiar with Freud's theories, who believe that shell shock is psychological. For them, the war offers an unusual opportunity.
Freud had worked with a very small number of patients and with women patients who came from quite a limited segment of Viennese society, upper middle class women from Jewish families, basically, who were leading lives of boredom and leisure. And suddenly, here you have the war, 80,000 shell shock cases in the European armies. So they provided an extraordinary wealth of experimental material, so to speak. And doctors, at the same time that they were appalled, were fascinated. They recognized the opportunity they had before them to study precisely the kinds of conflicts that Freud had written about in this very, very large sample of the population.
We might be able to understand what was happening psychologically to these young men in the trenches that were causing them to develop these symptoms. Everything in your body is saying, get out of there, save yourself, and everything in your training is saying you've got to stay in the trenches and defend your country. And the conflict is so unbearable that, as the psychoanalysts would ultimately say, the organism takes a flight into illness.
Shell shock is the body language of powerlessness. And powerlessness can come in a lot of different situations. You can have power in the world, but if you find yourself in a situation where you are powerless for a variety of reasons to speak your real feelings, the body will convert those feelings into symptoms. These soldiers who were brave, who were fit, who were patriotic, found themselves dealing with fear, anxiety, grief, loneliness, disorientation, all these kinds of feelings which were new to them and which were not part of the society's definition of what it meant to be a man. They couldn't articulate those feelings.
Doctors try any method from crude forms of electric shock to talking therapy to restore the soldier to fighting shape and back to the front. For thousands of soldiers like these, it is the talking cure that works when nothing else does. Simply talking can save them. Many soldiers frozen in fear can now be healed. Soldiers immobilized by memories can now move on. The laboratory of war demonstrates that many of Freud's ideas are more than abstract theories. They can offer a practical basis for treatment. His notion of the unconscious will dominate ideas about the hidden sources of human behavior for decades to come.
I think it showed up to people on a massive scale that emotional and environmental factors were extremely important in determining our mental lives. It's as an experience of the war that psychology and psychiatry now cease being simply medical specialties applied to a very tiny number of people, but a way to understand, in general, ourselves, our minds, and our world.
When World War I comes to a close, a battle of a different sort begins. Only this time, the weapons are words, and the soldiers are scientists. This new battle will rage between two diametrically opposed views of human behavior. On one side are the scientists who see our personalities as unchanging, fixed at birth, biologically determined. And on the other side are those who believe we can change, that we are influenced by our experiences and what we learn along the way. When the debate heats up in the United States, life is changing rapidly and dramatically. It's an unsettling time for most people who yearn for stability and normalcy and certainty. What scientists have to say about human behavior, whether it's fixed at birth and predictable, or shaped by the environment and changeable, will have a profound effect on how people view the future, how they see each other, and even how they live their lives. In 1918, the war to end all wars is finally over. American soldiers returned to a country eager to take its place as a leader in a rapidly changing world. But America's optimistic hopes for the future are soon undercut by some unexpected and disturbing news. The Army publishes the results of tests it conducted during wartime, assessing the mental capacity of its recruits. The shocking conclusion: nearly half of all American soldiers are feeble-minded. Army psychologists have fired the first shot in a scientific war that will last for decades to come.
When the Army tests results were published, and it was stated that a goodly portion of inductees into the U.S. Army had a mental age of under 12, ergo moron by popular definition of psychologists, there was a sense of shock. How could it be that so many American boys had such low intelligence?
They led people to believe that we had a major problem. Namely, we had too many morons. The country was filled with morons. The theory that the Army tests have proven that the country is really a lot dumber than people thought is going to feed into a lot of fears about the society that was developing.
The fears multiply. The fear that America's gene pool is being weakened by an unending influx of immigrants. The fear that Americans will lack the mental faculties to perform the complex tasks of modern life. When the Army commissioned the tests during the war, the generals faced a staggering logistical task. Deluged with some 2 million recruits, they tried to match each man to the job, choosing potential officers and weeding out potential misfits. In desperation, the Army turned to a group of psychologists who believed they had the perfect tool to get the job done: a standardized intelligence test. Henry Goddard, father of the first American intelligence test, is part of a new wave of psychologists eager to be of service to their country.
They had one clear, practical goal for their science: to sort the entire Army quickly, in an hour. They had to find a test that could be done fast and that could immediately distinguish different levels of mental skill.
They spring into action. They test general knowledge with questions like, what is Crisco? What is the product advertised by Velvet Joe? Or what is a dibble?
The Army test required an immense amount of cultural information. One had to know American sports. One had to know American advertising. One had to know that Velvet Joe was a character who advertised tobacco.
In addition, they also ask questions of practical judgment. Is black the same as white? And why is beef better food than cabbage?
The inherent fallacy, certainly of the tests of those days, was the fact that they were filled with the culture of a particular class and location and were treated as though they were universal and fair. And people who were not from those classes or groups did not do well.
But the intelligence testers feel certain they are testing native, inborn intelligence, not acquired knowledge. And this intelligence should be as measurable as a bar of steel.
It was the belief that there was an entity called intelligence, and that tests were measuring it in the same way that there's an entity called potatoes, and you put them on a scale, there's a scale that's measuring them.
The scale for intelligence is developed by Henry Goddard at the Training School for Feeble-Minded Boys and Girls in Vineland, New Jersey. Through his observations, he comes to believe that intelligence, and its opposite, feeble-mindedness, is inherited. But as a scientist, Goddard wants proof. He confesses to his friend, Charles Davenport, "When it comes to the genetics of intelligence, I have much more zeal than knowledge." Charles Davenport is a pioneer in the blossoming field of genetics. He too believes that behaviors, like intelligence, can be passed down from one generation to the next. If, as the experiments of Gregor Mendel have shown, there is one gene for wrinkled peas and another for smooth, one gene for blue eyes and another for brown, then perhaps there are also genes for other traits, like intelligence. A respected biologist from the University of Chicago, Charles Davenport and his colleagues have been studying the hereditary traits of animals, chickens, canaries, and rabbits. Through his research, Davenport becomes convinced that Mendelian genetics will explain not only inherited traits in plants and animals, but also in human beings.
They tried to find biological bases of things that they called nomadism, the tendency of people to move from place to place. And at least one geneticist found a genetic basis for what he called thalassophilia, a love of the sea that was expressed in naval officers, and which he contended must be a sex-linked trait, that is, to males, because only males became officers in the Navy.
And Davenport believes that other traits are linked, too. He believes that low intelligence causes poverty, criminality, and prostitution. And if intelligence is fixed at birth, then these behaviors must be genetic in origin as well.
The traits were believed to be unchangeable, we had, as a matter of fact, the phrase, the leopard cannot change his spots, therefore people cannot change what was given to them by nature. There was a belief we were products of nature, predestined to be what we were born, and that environment had no effect on it.
Davenport's ideas catch fire among those looking for scientific ways to improve society. He recruits graduates of Vassar and Harvard, eager to join him on the vanguard of genetic research. He persuades the Carnegie Institution of Washington to fund a new research station in Cold Spring Harbor, New York. All for the promotion of eugenics, a movement to improve the quality of the human race by selective breeding. But not everyone believes that biology is destiny. For many scientists, it's your experiences in life that count. Your upbringing, your education, your environment. Chief among these scientists is psychologist John Watson, who offers a theory that is the mirror opposite of eugenics.
This was the heyday of hereditarians and geneticists who said that human beings were constrained by their genetic inheritance. And Watson was saying that this is baloney, that human beings were shaped solely by their environment.
Over the years, Watson studies the behavior of babies, hundreds of them. To Watson, we arrive in the world a blank slate, tabula rasa. Nearly everything is learned, even things we think are instinctual, like fear. To prove that environment is more powerful than genetics, Watson designs an experiment for an infant known as Little Albert. He's so confident, he films it for posterity. At first, Albert shows little fear, even when Watson places a burning newspaper in front of him. Albert is also unafraid when he encounters a white rat for the first time in his life. But then Watson shows Albert the rat accompanied by a loud clanging noise, one of the few things that upsets little Albert. And he does it again. And does it again. Eventually, Albert learns to fear not just the rat, but all furry things, even without the loud noise. In Watson's mind, the Little Albert experiment is a success because it proves that fears are learned, not inherited. Watson calls his theory behaviorism and begins to popularize it. He urges parents to take active control of their children's upbringing by shaping their environment. To think of the home as a scientific laboratory. But Watson's interest in childhood is purely professional.
He didn't like children much. He referred to them in one of his many statements as always squalling and shouting and dirty and wanting to be fed and sort of a nuisance. It's clear he didn't particularly like them in his own environment. But he felt that the good of society required shaping individuals right from day one, and to do that right from day one, you had to start with the babies.
Ebullient and self-promoting, Watson gathers a wide and appreciative audience, which holds in high esteem any scientific thinking on the subject of child-rearing.
Science was increasingly important in the popular mindset. If science said something, if scientists tested, if scientists experimented, well, then it must be so.
But the appeal of behaviorism runs deeper. Its egalitarian philosophy and outlook seems to reflect the very spirit of democracy.
Watson was the voice of the American dream. And the American dream was that this is the land of opportunity. You can become what you would like to be, even if you're not there yet. And at least if you don't do it in your lifetime, this is the land in which your children can do it.
The American dream of opportunity draws millions of immigrants. They come by the shipload to fill the jobs of a rapidly expanding economy, to seek a better life. But the arrival of new immigrants increases all kinds of fears. Some are economic, that the immigrant worker will lower the wages of American workers, or take their jobs altogether, all the while crowding their cities and their schools. And there are also biological fears. Charles Davenport and others in the eugenics movement worry that the new immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe are bringing defective genes with them. They have no faith that America will transform the immigrants. If anything, they fear the immigrants will transform America. For the eugenicists, the immigrant's dream is their nightmare.
If these newcomers who came off the ships, who seemed so short, so misshapen compared to rugged American individuals, intermarried and bred in this country, there was a fear that they would actually weaken the race, as it was called. Indeed, some spoke of race suicide, that immigration could lead to Americans actually annihilating their own rugged, robust, pioneering breed.
And the idea was that many of them were defective, and that the American population was quickly filling up with defectives. The notion was that America had become the asylum of the world.
There is a groundswell of national support to set strict immigration quotas. From labor unions to the Ku Klux Klan, they joined together to pressure President Coolidge to protect the nation by signing the 1924 Immigration Restriction Act. It's a law that, in the words of one congressman, is a necessity for keeping pure the blood of America. For the eugenics movement, the Immigration Act is a great victory. A national campaign is underway to spread the eugenic vision to local communities. State fairs are a favorite place to educate the public. What better opportunity to talk about breeding than at a livestock competition?
If you could control breeding, you could control the evolution, the fate of a society. You could breed for intelligence. You could breed for justice. You could breed for good moral sense. You could breed for physical appearance.
It had a wide appeal to people across a broad political spectrum. It meant that man might finally be able to control his future. That man might control the process of birth. That man might eliminate birth defects. That man might actually breed a better human being.
Along with the usual competitions, best livestock, best crops, and best homemade goods. There's also the best human stock competition.
Better baby contests fall into this category. Babies were examined and weighed and measured to determine who was the most robust.
There are even fitter families competitions. Any healthy American family can enter. All you need is to take a medical exam, an intelligence test, and supply a complete eugenic history. But invariably, the winners are white, of Northern European stock. This is the pinnacle of the eugenics movement in the United States. There are new immigration laws. There are new marriage laws forbidding mixed-race marriages. There are even new sterilization laws preventing criminals, epileptics, and the insane from reproducing. Laws, all designed to protect the gene pool. All widely acclaimed by eugenicists for what they consider biological wisdom.
The eugenics movement begins to lose its credibility, at least as science, when a new generation of scientists begin to study genetics. When they begin to discover, for instance, that even understanding an organism as simple as a fruit fly is far more complex a process than we ever dreamed possible.
In laboratories like this one at the University of Texas, scientists are studying the inheritance patterns of fruit flies. Because fruit flies breed quickly, it makes them ideal subjects for experiments to see how they change. By the late 1920s, research makes clear that genetics will not be explained as simply as one gene, one trait. The work shows that many traits are not the product of single genes, but are polygenic, the product of several genes. Something as simple as eye color, for example, can be affected by as many as 7 different genetic variables. And if a fruit fly is this complex, what, scientists wonder, does that imply for human genetics? But in the public's mind, the science of genetics, the pseudoscience of eugenics, and a popular form of behaviorism can all coexist to explain human behavior. On a sheer practical level, behaviorism, for example, has become far more pervasive than hardly anyone realizes. Still leading the pack is John Watson himself, who has left academia for the far more lucrative field of advertising. It's the perfect home for his belief that behavior isn't fixed at all, but is shaped by outside forces.
Watson believed that the consumer is to the manufacturer what the green frog is to the experimental physiologist. What Watson believed is that he had the techniques at his disposal to shape consumer behavior.